I never imagined the sterile smell of the ICU could feel like a battlefield. Yet here I was, gripping the edges of a cold metal chair, heart racing like it had its own agenda, and staring at him, Lucas, 42. The man I thought I knew, the man who smiled over breakfast and whispered promises I now knew were empty. Lying there with a ventilator humming beside him, his reputation as untouchable in the hospital hierarchy crumbling around him as quickly as my trust had, and 135 with a knack for reading people like open books, with a habit of noticing every detail, every hesitation, felt the sting of betrayal cut deeper than any illness in this room, my mind spinning as the weight of everything he had done pressed down on me. Not just the affair with the nurse in room 4 or the off-the-books investments that drained our savings, but the quiet, poisonous manipulation of my family to make me look incompetent while he played the victim, and now he was gasping for air. Oblivious that the woman who had signed his life away in contracts and investments, who had documented every fraudulent maneuver, held the pen that could finally expose him. The pen trembling in my hand only because I had to resist the urge to throw it, my fingers slick with sweat, the irony stabbing me like a scalpel, that the place he thought would protect him, the place he called safe, was about to become his undoing, and my chest tightened as I remembered my own warnings to myself. Never trust someone who smiles at catastrophe, never let love blind you to danger. And yet here I sat, tears threatening but controlled, because my signature was more powerful than his threats, more permanent than his lies, and with one careful, deliberate motion I could unravel everything he had built. The ICU lights flickering overhead like a countdown, machines beeping in rhythm with my pulse, every sound amplifying the tension, my mind calculating, heart pounding, the moral storm I had to navigate, whether to use my power as leverage or to wait for the perfect, undeniable moment to strike. And in that moment, when the world felt suspended between life and exposure, I heard him murmur my name, a weak, incredulous sound. And I realized the look on my face, calm yet unyielding, was the final signal that control had shifted, and just as I lifted the pen, poised for the action that could change everything, the nurse stepped back, the door clicked, and I froze, breath caught, because the next few seconds would decide not just the end of a marriage, but the collapse of a man who thought he could play God in my life. And if you want to see exactly how I turned the tables, make sure to subscribe to our channel now. You will not want to miss what happens next. Looking back, I realize how the cracks had been forming long before the ICU, like invisible fractures in glass that no one notices until the moment it shatters. And I remember my mother, 60, insisting I marry someone respectable, someone who could outshine my own stubborn ambition, and Lucas had seemed perfect then, charming in boardrooms, patient in family dinners, a man who could command a room with a smile. And yet beneath his polished veneer I had glimpsed the first hints of control, the way he subtly dismissed my ideas at work, the way he laughed a little too long when my younger sister, 28, voiced concerns about our finances, and I remember my colleagues at the hospital, especially Dr. Shaw, who had once mentored me, nodding with quiet warning when Lucas maneuvered me into signing documents that benefited him far more than us, and my best friend, Mara, 34, who had watched the marriage bloom and slowly wilt, would sometimes hint, over coffee or hurried text messages, that I was being blinded by loyalty, and I had brushed it off, telling myself love could coexist with caution, ambition could coexist with trust. But every late-night call from Lucas, every whispered complaint about my family, every subtle undermining in meetings, had been layers in a storm I refused to see until the ICU brought it crashing to the surface, and I realize now that my own drive, my obsession with uncovering truth in patient charts, with double-checking finances, with meticulously planning my career, may have made me vulnerable, given him the opportunity to exploit weaknesses I barely recognized. And yet, as I sit in reflection, I can see the complexity of our entanglement, the way my father, retired and weary, had always admired Lucas for his decisiveness, the way my younger brother, Mark, had developed quiet resentment for me because Lucas had always seemed to favor my decisions over his, the way my colleagues alternated between admiration for my competence and envy of my ability to maintain composure while juggling chaos, and every relationship felt like a delicate balance between gratitude and resentment, loyalty and suspicion. And the deeper I dig, the more I understand that Lucas had not just betrayed me. He had woven a network of reliance, expectation, and subtle manipulation that made his eventual fall not just inevitable but also almost poetic. And in these reflections, I sense future dilemmas brewing, from legal challenges to family confrontations, from professional rivalries that may now surface because the shield of our marriage has been broken. And yet in the quiet of my thoughts, there is also a thrill, a recognition that knowledge gives me power. And that every conversation, every glance, every secret favor I had overlooked or dismissed, is now a piece of a puzzle I can finally solve, and the stakes feel higher than ever because lives, reputations, and trust hang in fragile balance. And if you want to follow the twists in this tangled web and see how alliances shift when the truth comes to light, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next revelation. The moment I realized Lucas had underestimated me, a chill ran through my veins, sharp and undeniable, like ice carving through warm skin, and it started with a folder I almost ignored, tucked behind patient charts in his office, filled with documents that revealed the depth of his deception, investments he hid, favors he traded, and manipulations that had threaded through every part of our lives without my notice. And I felt anger and disbelief collide, my hands trembling as I sorted the papers, my mind racing because the lines between legal and illegal, ethical and selfish, blurred before me, and I thought of the nurses who whispered about his favoritism, the administrators who subtly feared him, and even my own friends who had quietly expressed concern. But now everything they hinted at screamed for attention, and yet I hesitated. Because wielding this knowledge meant stepping into territory I had feared for years. Confronting a man I once trusted with the full weight of truth. A man who could ruin my career if I moved too soon. A man who had already attempted to twist the law and loyalty in his favor, and I felt my stomach knot as the weight of my choices pressed down. The moral dilemma suffocating me, because exposing him now would shatter his life but also risk unraveling mine, risking relationships with family who depended on us both, and colleagues who might not know where their loyalties lay. And in that moment, every emotion collided, guilt and rage, fear and determination, as I imagined the courtroom, the headlines, the whispers, and still, the pen I held in my hand felt like a sword suspended over his empire, ready to strike but demanding precision. And I thought about my sister, who had unknowingly become a pawn in Lucas's games, about my best friend Mara, who had begged me to see the truth, and about my own ambitions, which had never been for control but for integrity. And yet, here I was, perched on the edge of action, because every second delayed was another opportunity for him to manipulate, to cover tracks, to reassert power, and the hospital, once a place of healing, now felt like a stage for a duel I had no choice but to fight. The fluorescent lights flickering over charts and machines, casting shadows that seemed to whisper secrets I could barely process, and I felt pressure mounting from unseen forces, emails from auditors, hushed warnings from colleagues, the subtle but sharp glance of a nurse who knew more than she admitted, and my heart pounded as I realized I was alone in this, facing a choice that would define everything. And yet even in the anxiety, in the fear of moral misstep, a spark of clarity ignited, the recognition that I could not allow him to write the story of our lives. That truth, however painful, had to have its moment. And as I looked down at the folder, my fingers hovering over the pages, I knew the next decision would not just change him, it would change me, and the seconds stretched into eternity. Because the stakes were higher than any betrayal, and the question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding: what would I risk to ensure justice, and what would I lose if I failed? And if you want to see how I confronted this impossible choice and the consequences that followed, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you stay with us through the entire story. The second I acted, the world shifted in ways I had not anticipated. Papers signed, files forwarded, evidence secured, and suddenly Lucas was no longer untouchable. But the victory was not simple, not clean, because the hospital, our colleagues, even my own family, reacted in subtle, unpredictable ways, whispers curling through the halls, like smoke, emails marked urgent landing in my inbox with questions I could not answer, my phone vibrating constantly with calls from auditors and lawyers, my stomach tight with dread as I realized the consequences of exposing him would ripple far beyond him, into my career, my friendships, my family. And yet the pressure of inaction had been unbearable, a weight pressing on my chest as if reminding me that every day I hesitated, he could strike back, and I could feel his influence trying to claw its way back, subtle manipulations from the board, colleagues siding quietly with him, even my own sister questioning my motives with a tremor of doubt in her voice. And I felt torn, exhilarated, terrified, because every relationship I had carefully nurtured now teetered on a knife edge, every ally a potential threat, every decision a gamble with enormous stakes. And the irony of it all hit me, that the man who had planned to end me, to humiliate me in the place he believed was his sanctuary, had set in motion a chain of events that now forced him to panic. And I watched as the first cracks appeared in his carefully curated life. Emails unanswered, colleagues avoiding him, and yet, in the same instant, subtle pressures pressed down on me. Reminders of what I had risked, late-night phone calls from my mother concerned about scandal, financial advisors questioning the legality of my actions, and even Mara urging caution because she feared he might retaliate in ways I could not predict. And I felt my pulse spike, the moral tension twisting with the stakes. Because I knew that every step forward could trigger backlash, that the deeper I went, the more dangerous the game became. And still, part of me felt alive in a way I had never felt, the clarity of purpose mixed with the thrill of confrontation. Knowing that the tables had turned, but also knowing the fight was far from over. And then the ICU nurse, the one who had first whispered the warnings, approached quietly, glancing over her shoulder, eyes wide with unspoken alarm, and I felt the electricity of the moment. The sense that every move was being watched, every misstep could undo everything, and Lucas, lying in the very room he had thought would shield him, now vulnerable in ways I had predicted, raised his head slightly, his gaze locking with mine, calculating, angry, fearful, and the tension between us was almost tangible, every second stretching, every heartbeat echoing like a drum of war. And I realized in that instant that the consequences of my choice had only begun. That the ripple I started would not stop with him, that the stakes would grow higher, the pressure more intense. And if you want to witness exactly how the confrontation escalates, and what happens when everything is on the line, make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow every twist as it unfolds. I never expected the final piece to fall into my lap with such quiet ferocity, the truth hiding in plain sight, buried beneath layers of manipulation I had spent months untangling. And it started with a simple email, overlooked at first, from one of Lucas's closest allies, the kind of message that seemed harmless, routine, until I noticed the subtle language. The hint of complicity, the way every word betrayed knowledge of his secret dealings. And my stomach dropped, because it revealed not just his deceptions but the depth of a betrayal I had never imagined, that the hospital audits, the financial irregularities, the whispered threats, had all been orchestrated, not by him alone, but by someone I had trusted implicitly. Someone whose advice I had valued above my own instincts. And the shock hit like a physical blow, my hands trembling, my chest tight, my mind racing as every memory of my interactions, my careful planning, my patience and caution, suddenly shifted under this new light, and I realized that the person I had confided in, the one I thought was guiding me through the storm, had their own agenda. One that aligned with Lucas in ways I could never have predicted, and my emotions twisted, disbelief colliding with rage, disappointment, a piercing sense of exposure. And yet, even in that moment of devastation, I felt a surge of resolve. Because if they believed I could be undermined so easily, they had misjudged me, and I could see now that every hesitation, every small mistake they thought they forced upon me, had actually prepared me, sharpened me, made me ready for the revelation I now held in my hands. And as I pieced together the connections, the subtle manipulations, the hidden transfers, the silent alliances, the ICU itself seemed to mirror the chaos. Machines humming in a steady rhythm, lights flickering like punctuation, the air thick with anticipation, and Lucas, still vulnerable, still believing he controlled the narrative, raised his eyes to mine, unaware that the very leverage he had counted on was slipping through his fingers, that the signature I had wielded, the documents I had secured, were about to expose not just him but the shadowed network that had kept him untouchable for so long. And in that instant, the weight of responsibility pressed down, because I realized this twist, this revelation, could destroy lives, redefine alliances, shatter trust, and yet, it also held the potential for justice, for clarity, for finally reclaiming control over the story I had lived. And my pulse raced as I considered the moral stakes, the timing, the consequences, the delicate balance between action and restraint, because one wrong move could undo everything. And just as I lifted the documents, poised to reveal the truth to the world, the phone rang, a voice on the other end warning me to reconsider, a subtle reminder that in this tangled web surprises lurked at every corner, and the twist was only beginning. And if you want to see how this revelation reshapes everything, and who will truly emerge unscathed, make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow every shocking turn as it unfolds. The weight of the folder in my hands felt heavier than any physical burden, each document a decision I could no longer delay. And I realized that the moment for hesitation had passed, that every choice I had made, every careful step, every pause and calculation, had led to this one pivotal instant, where the consequences would ripple through my life, Lucas's, and everyone who had played a part in the tangled web of deception. And I could feel my pulse hammering as I scanned the room, noting the subtle glances of nurses, the quiet hum of machines, the faint ticking of the clock that seemed louder than usual, each sound amplifying the intensity of the decision before me, and I thought of my sister, who had depended on me to protect her from ruin. My colleagues, who had trusted me to act with integrity, and the auditors who would scrutinize every action, weighing morality against legality, and I understood that no action would be perfect, no decision would come without loss, and still, clarity shone through the fear, illuminating the path I knew I had to take, and I lifted the pen, feeling the tension coil in my shoulders. The moral storm in my mind pressing, yet also the spark of resolve. The recognition that inaction was no longer an option, that integrity demanded courage even when the stakes were devastating. And I signed, each stroke deliberate, each line a statement that control had shifted, that accountability was inevitable, that the chain of manipulation and betrayal would meet its reckoning, and immediately. The consequences began to unfold, subtle at first, the quiet panic in Lucas's eyes, the whispered conversations between colleagues, the careful adjustments in schedules and duties, and then more tangible, auditors reviewing files, financial irregularities flagged, alliances realigned, my sister watching in cautious relief, Mara texting encouragement, and yet, even as some weight lifted, new pressures emerged. A reminder that no victory comes without cost, that relationships are fragile, that reputation and trust are not easily repaired, and I felt the thrill of resolve mixed with the sting of loss, the knowledge that while justice had been set in motion, personal sacrifices were inevitable, that I would need to navigate the aftermath with care and strength, and the ICU, once a place of fear, now seemed almost symbolic, a space where truth had been revealed, choices made, consequences initiated, and I understood that this decision, monumental as it was, marked not an end but a turning point, a moment where power, morality, and courage converged, and Lucas, for all his previous control, could only watch as the tides shifted irrevocably, and as I exhaled, muscles trembling, heart racing, I realized the significance of what I had done, that my action had not only altered his path, but defined mine. And if you want to see how this decisive moment reshapes every life involved, how alliances shift, and what comes next in this tangled story, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you do not miss a single twist or revelation. Sitting alone in the quiet of the office after the storm had passed, I finally allowed myself to breathe, the hum of the hospital machines replaced by the soft rhythm of my own thoughts, and I realized that the chaos, the betrayals, the moral dilemmas, had taught me more than I could have imagined. That trust, once broken, carries a weight that cannot be ignored, and responsibility is never convenient, it is heavy, demanding, often uncomfortable, and boundaries, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, are vital shields against manipulation, and I thought about Lucas, who had once seemed untouchable, now forced to face the consequences of choices he had made without regard for others. And I understood that justice is rarely immediate or absolute, but it is shaped by courage and integrity, by the willingness to act even when the stakes are high, and as I reflected, I thought of my family. My sister watching me with cautious hope, Mara offering quiet support, and even the colleagues who had doubted me, now seeing that decisiveness paired with principle can change outcomes in ways that caution alone cannot, and I felt a subtle shift within myself. A blend of relief and awareness, knowing that the battle had ended but the lessons would remain, etched into my daily life, informing every choice, every interaction, every relationship, and I understood that clarity often comes at a cost, but it also grants freedom, a chance to act without fear, clouding judgment, and the ICU, which had once felt like a battleground, now seemed like a place of revelation, a reminder that the spaces we fear can also teach us resilience, patience, and strength. And I thought about the ripple effect of actions, how one decision, made with integrity, can reshape not only the lives of those involved but also the path of our own hearts. And I felt gratitude for the courage I had found, for the support that had quietly held me steady, and for the lessons that emerged from the chaos, subtle yet powerful, guiding me toward a future defined not by fear or betrayal but by principle and careful resolve. And as I reflected, I could not help but wonder, what would you have done in my place? Would you have acted with the same decisiveness, the same moral clarity, or would hesitation have held you back? And I leave that question for you, because it is in these reflections, in these choices, that we discover not only the measure of others but also the measure of ourselves. And as the day ended, sunlight streaming through the hospital windows, I finally felt a sense of completion, a quiet understanding that while life may always present dilemmas, The courage to act with integrity, to protect boundaries, and to honor trust even when it is difficult, is a lesson worth carrying. And if you want to explore more stories of courage, betrayal, and the lessons life quietly teaches, make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow along. Because there is always more to learn, and every choice has a story behind it.